STEMinism, the Equity in STEM podcast, sponsored by the Royal Society of Chemistry, where we hold conversations about race representation in STEM with the greatest minds in industry and academia. Hello, everybody, and welcome to STEMinism, the Equity in STEM podcast, where we have conversations about representation and race in the realm of science,
technology,
engineering,
and mathematics.
My name is Ali Saad.
I'm Clive Sowa. Today, we are here with a distinguished guest, someone whose story starts in rural Kenya, but that's only the beginning. He went on to have degrees at the University of Nairobi, then transitioned to the University of Cambridge to study his PhD. He's a research fellow at the Trinity College. He holds an EPSRC Advanced Fellowship, as well as being a lecturer. He started off as a lecturer at the University of Nottingham, then progressed to a professor, representing less than 0.5% of Black professors in chemistry at one point. Robert's research interests include design, synthesis, and characterization of new forms of sustainable porous materials. He's a member of the Royal Society Wolfson Research Merit Award holder, Pro-Vice Chancellor for Global Engagement at the University of Nottingham. He was awarded an OBE for services to chemical sciences. We're not done yet. He's also a member of the Board of Trustees at the Royal Society of Chemistry, Chair of the Royal Society of Chemistry's Inclusion and Diversity Committee. He's a founding member of the Pan-African Chemistry Network and plays a leading role in promoting EDI in higher education. Not only is he a role model, most likely he's your mentor's mentor, as well as being a fantastic public speaker. Today we have none other than
Professor Robert Mokaya. What a list. I must say, it's been quite an impressive career. How are you, first of all? Are you well today?
Yeah, I'm very well. I'm very well. Thank you very much. And thank you for coming to Nottingham.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, really, really pleased to be here and to be here talking to you today. So should we jump right into it? So I always like to... when I try and understand someone's perspective and their outlook on life, I think it's really important to explore their earliest years. I understand you grew up in Kenya. I'm also from Kenya, so it's always great to meet another fellow Kenya national. Can you talk somewhat about maybe the location, the area you grew up in, and maybe also the family dynamics that shaped you today?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So, for those who know Kenya, I come from the western part of Kenya. It's a place that is called Kisii. It's a hilly place, got beautiful rivers, and I like to say that it's the most beautiful place on earth. It's pretty much always green. Only rains in the afternoon, and only just enough rain. So that's where I grew up in pretty much a rural setting. I belonged and still belong to a large family. And when I say large, quite large, because I have 8 siblings. So that's quite large. 7 brothers and a sister.
Okay.
So growing up was, I had people around me. And I'm one of the younger ones. I'm the 7th born, which means I have had a lot of people ahead of me that I could look up to, help me in doing things. So it was really a very typical Kenyan family growing up in the late 70s and early 80s in my early years in primary school.
Love that. Big family, very big family. So who's younger than you? Is that another brother or is that
I have 2 brothers who are younger than me.
Yeah, okay,
yeah.
Okay.
And my one and only sister is the 3rd born.
Okay.
So she did a lot of looking after us when we were young, me and my 2 younger siblings.
I can't imagine being surrounded by so many boys. That must have been an interesting experience for her.
Yeah, all grown up now. We are all,
Must have been a great five-a-side football team.
We are fathers and some are grandparents. But still a close-knit family, yeah.
Can you talk somewhat about maybe the value of education in your family? What the sort of lessons around education that maybe your parents try to instill in their children?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Because obviously my older brothers would have been growing up in the 60s and in the 70s. And in the Kenyan setting at that particular time, it was not usual for people to go to university. But then, luckily for me, my oldest brother actually went to university. And at the time when he was going to university, he wanted to study pharmacy. You couldn't study pharmacy in Kenya at that time.
Wow.
But he wanted to study pharmacy, and the Kenyan government did want to have pharmacists trained. Okay. And so he had this rare opportunity in the early 70s to study pharmacy in Manchester.
Wow.
And so my eldest brother went to university, and in a sense, that meant that everybody who followed him didn't want to stop until they went to university. So the whole family, everybody went to university. And I also benefited from that. So that wouldn't be unusual now, I would say. But at that particular time, because you're going back, 30, 40 years ago, that was not unusual, particularly in where we grew up in the setting and the environment. I recall that he was one of the very first people to go to university from a large area from where we grew up. So essentially for my parents, so my parents didn't go to university. My father had an opportunity to go to university, but he didn't because it came on late in life. But they saw the value of education. And so they gave us all the opportunities to excel. So they certainly made those available. And my mother, she basically, her job was to take care of us and to just make sure that we had all we could. But they really did emphasize education, and we thank them for that.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's managed to get so many of us far ahead, and I think the same in our backgrounds. Education was something that was like, you had to do your best to try and get straight A's. I mean, it was always a bit of a chip on my shoulder because my dad was a straight A student from age 7, so trying to keep up.
So where would you say your passion for chemistry and science came from? It sounds like you were always deep into education and your family had that as a fundamental life lesson. Where did the passion for science originate?
So I guess for me, it's my curiosity. So I was very curious. I mean, I asked lots of questions. Why does this happen like this? Why is this? What is this? And, so that curiosity is something that I carried to school, and I asked questions. And so I enjoyed most subjects. But when it got to the point where I needed to decide what I was going to do, I found that actually chemistry started to answer some of those questions in a way that perhaps the other subjects didn't. And so going into the lab and actually doing experiments and reading about things and then actually showing that they can happen in the lab, in lower secondary school. That was interesting. So by the time I was in high school and deciding what to do, so chemistry was one of the things I wanted to do, and so I would say it came from my curiosity. But I also have to say that one of my older brothers did study chemistry, and having conversations with him was also quite helpful in recognizing that actually you could, because when I was going to university, he had already graduated and was starting to work, so that also helped. So curiosity, I would say, and that curiosity has remained up to now. So chemistry has answered some questions, but not all.
Not all. And yeah, I think that curiosity is definitely a great starting point, and it kind of reminds me of my children when they're at that why stage. Why this? Why that? And you get to the point where you don't even have all the answers yourself. So going from high school and then transitioning and studying your chemistry degree at the University of Nairobi, how does one go from Kenya. I think you've alluded to it slightly in your brother's circumstances as the opportunities to become a pharmacist. But how did you go from a chemist in Nairobi, Kenya to the esteemed halls of Cambridge University and Trinity College?
Yeah. So when I finished my my undergraduate degree, there was the opportunity to do postgraduate work at the University of Nairobi. But then I also had this offer of a job at Unilever in Nairobi in Kenya, and so I chose to actually go and work with Unilever for 1 year, and I'm very honest that I found that the environment there, whilst it was excellent, I was a management trainee, and it was a good job, but it didn't really address my curiosity and my desire to have every day different from and so 12 months I was very, very lucky that at the end of about a year, I had a scholarship to go and study in Cambridge. Now, my parents could not have afforded to pay for me to go and study anywhere outside of Kenya, let alone Cambridge. But I was lucky that I was one day wandering around the University of Nairobi, and I saw a sign that said, "Well, you want to apply for this scholarship? Apply." And it was as simple as that. So I saw it. I applied, and I was successful, and that's how I managed to go to Cambridge to pursue a PhD. Yeah.
I wonder how many people have walked past that same sign and whether they also made those applications or not. Yeah, it's hard to tell, but I think you need to be a certain kind of person to be like, I'm going to leave home and I'm going to go halfway around the world and I don't know what I'm going to find and I'm just going to throw myself into this new environment. So that's I guess incredibly admirable.
Yes, I mean absolutely, and I think taking those opportunities when they come is always helpful because you need to broaden your horizons, as it were. And I mean, you mentioned applying for that scholarship. I mean, I always say to people that if it's only one person who's going to be hired, why is that person not going to be you? The best way of making sure you don't get hired is you don't apply. But if you apply, something might happen. You might get. If the worst that can happen is nothing happens. But if you don't do anything, nothing will happen certainly. And that's the best way of making sure that nothing happens, by doing nothing. So do something. Something might happen.
I love that.
I think that's lesson one of the day, isn't it?
So wherever you are now, if you've got it on your mind, apply for it. Do something. Or at least that way something will happen.
So Cambridge is an interesting place in the UK in itself, particularly Cambridge University. Can you maybe comment on some of the cultural differences that you found quite stark coming over to the UK, or was it just nice and easy transition? Were there things that you noticed that were like, this is very weird, I'm not very used to this kind of setting?
No, it wasn't nice and easy. But I think I was at the age where you can deal with those sort of things, and so it was obviously very different. The biggest jump for me really was that I had been studying chemistry in a place where there was lots of good equipment, and our labs at the University of Nairobi were okay, but actually the transition to Cambridge. So I had read about pieces of equipment. I had read about them. I knew everything I needed to know about them, but actually I had not necessarily worked with those pieces of equipment, or if I had seen them, they were always operated by a technician just to make sure that everything. So I was then here in Cambridge where this equipment were accessible. You could really, go into the lab, and so the accessibility of advanced equipment, that was one significant jump. So that's from the sort of chemistry side. So it took me a little while to get used to that, but of course that was really positive. I think the other side was obviously you come to this place and it's cold. And I came in October, and October the winter is kicking in, so I had to deal with that. And of course you get used to it. And of course you're in a foreign land, and that can be challenging. You don't know many people, so anybody has to deal with those things. But for me, really, what helped is that the Kenyan education system at the time had borrowed quite a lot from the UK education system, because, of course, you recall that Kenya was a colony of the UK, and so there were sort of things there I could actually recognize. So that did help, and of course, I had grown up knowing that there is a place called Oxford and there's a place called Cambridge, as many tend to know. Sure. But actually, being there and being part of the university was something that I really valued. So I think there were challenges, but I think being sort of that age where you're able to deal with, helped quite a lot. So I mean, since then, I have seen people who actually come from very different environments and see them struggle. So one thing that I have absolutely come to appreciate is that it's not an easy transition.
Sure.
And often it is the case that in the early days, people need support.
Sure.
People really need support. And it's something that actually has helped me in my current role as Pro Vice Chancellor for Global Engagement at the University of Nottingham, recognizing that you need to put some things in place for people coming from all over the world to this new place, so that in a month's time, they are settled and they can get on with their studies and excel.
Mm-hmm. Surprised you didn't mention the pilau and these things. The food is one of the things that I'd be missing. I'm always sad that I'm away
I can
from my
tell you
mum
for
as well.
sure that I did learn to have potatoes in all their different forms. Now in Kenya we would eat potatoes in, it's just potatoes, and you just boil the potatoes or you fry the potatoes. But here there is potato, this potato. So I sometimes went to the hall, and there were 5 different kinds of potatoes, and they were all potatoes for me, but it seemed fine, and I've got to use that.
Yeah.
So we now eat those different kinds of potatoes, but we've. You want Kenyan food, you can come to my home.
We'll definitely have to take you up on that invite.
Maybe just one more about Cambridge, actually, before we move on. I was just thinking, what year is it that you said you arrived in Cambridge?
So I arrived a long time ago. So it was 1989.
So I can't imagine there would have been a lot of black faces in Cambridge at the time. Is it something that you noticed?
Yes, but you see, I noticed that, but I actually, it's interesting. I did notice, but I told myself, well, actually, you're in the UK, so most people in the UK are, going to be not black. But then, when I started traveling around the UK, I went to London. And my eyes were open.
Yeah.
I saw many black. I went to places like Birmingham, and I remember coming also to Nottingham, and then I realized that actually there are places in the UK where the number of black people is a lot. So Cambridge at that time was one of those. And of course, at the university, I was lucky to have just to get to know a few other black students who, like me, had traveled. Those are the black people that I knew. I didn't get to meet any local black people because there was such a small number of them at that particular time. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting dynamic, especially going from somewhere where you're a majority and everyone looks like you to now a more diverse and settings. And were there any challenges that you had in that regard in terms of maybe mentorship or networking, or did you have kind of a close-knit group of people that you tapped into and you felt sufficient with those that were around you?
Yeah. Now you see, I think you at that age you can be so you can be quite straightforward and naive. And I mean, I wasn't thinking about these things until I started recognizing that sometimes the treatment that I was getting, or the people's response to me was, and why did they do that? And then slowly, I came to understand that whilst it was not an issue for me, that some people didn't really know how to relate to me because they hadn't related to somebody like me before.
Sure.
And that can create all sorts of things, because then you don't know whether you should try and fit in or you should just be yourself. I mean, for me, the choice is always I am who I am. I always say to people, you can take me out of Kenya, but you can never take the Kenyan out of me.
Yes.
That will always remain there, and that's who I am. So I think, yes, I mean those were challenges that I had to deal with, and you don't deal with that in Kenya. You don't think about that, but then it becomes something else. And I remember talking to one of my friends. He was from Kenya. He was a little bit more senior in Cambridge, and he said something that has remained with me for a long time. He said, let's say his name is George. He said, in Kenya, I am George. When I get to the airport in Heathrow, I'm George and a black man. And so, and he said it in a way that was, and I thought, it doesn't matter in some places, but it does sometimes matter in other places. And I look forward to the time when it shouldn't matter, that you shouldn't have to be thinking all the time that I am, I am my race, that you should just be a person.
That's so interesting. I'm like, because I never lived on the continent of Africa, even though my family were from there. And, walking around in the UK, whenever I see black people on the streets, there's this like sort of unspoken camaraderie where you say hi to, you give each other a tip, you give each other some sort of confirmation. But just imagine like being in Nairobi, if you did that everywhere you went, you get kicked by the end of the day. Just
everybody
giving people tips like this.
Everybody is that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so maybe switching lanes a bit. You went on from your PhD to hold fellowships, becoming a professor, all these wonderful achievements that you've gone on to had. And what would you say were the key, not only challenges, but what were the key characteristics that you had that were able to get you to those levels, especially when we don't see many others at that level as well?
Yeah. So you see, going through the various stages that I've gone through, particularly the early part, I didn't always recognize that that there wasn't many like myself. So I mean, there were some African students, black students, being from Africa in Cambridge, and some even in the chemistry department, and that seemed reasonable. But actually, I hadn't understood that that actually, when you look at the chemical sciences in general, particularly at a more senior level, at that point I had no clue that it was actually devoid of people who looked like me. And as I went from one step to another, early in my career, I expected to progress just like all of my colleagues who are doing as well as I was. So I didn't expect any challenge. But then I started to realize that certain things were coming much more easily for them. And then I was having I seemed to be having to work a little bit harder, or I was being discouraged from certain things, or I was basically getting the vibe from people that you are not expected to do this. This is not the pathway for you. And so that was very surprising for me. And it took me a while to understand that actually part of the reason why this was happening was because to the people that were giving me those signals, they had not encountered somebody like me knocking on those doors. And so they didn't really know. They needed a formula of how it works for this. And there I was just knocking and saying, look, I am here as well. So I think that sort of low expectations is something that I always picked up, that some pathways people didn't expect me to be, so they would be surprised I wanted to do this, I wanted to apply for this, and for some people that can send you in a certain direction because But I decided within myself that for as long as I was doing as well as the people who were going through those doors, I would do my best to go through those doors, even if I had to wait a little bit and to get through those doors. So I think some people can describe what I'm referring to in all sorts of ways. But for me, it was going into these new areas and encountering people who were not necessarily always welcoming. But in the midst of that, I have all through my career had people who didn't look like me, who have been the most supportive, and I cannot thank them enough because I don't think you can go through. You can. I mean, I always say, show me a successful person who hasn't had a mentor, who hasn't had somebody hold their hand. And I have had people who have been supportive for me in that way. So in the midst of the challenges, which I think we can expound in terms of the low expectations and sometimes the obstacles that certain sections of the community encounter, there were people who supported me, and I think I concentrated more on that than on the challenges, because I decided that the challenges were the problem of the person raising them rather than my problems, and it was not my place to fight every battle. Yeah. But of course now I do see that it is useful to talk about those challenges, and those conversations are taking place now. At the time I was early in my career, no, those conversations were not taking place. Yeah.
I think it's important that people can hear the challenges that people go through, because they have a way to then relate to those stories and feel like they're not isolated, they're not alone in that experience. I also found it interesting hearing you talk about mentorship as well. Like, I feel like most successful people, or at least the people that we've been exposed to, and even ourselves, have had the benefit of having, mentors who are, just willing to give that time and that focus to us. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've had people who, it took me a while, but I finally realized that, because when a lot of people are not being supportive, you never quite know why somebody looks like they are so supportive. So, I mean, I had an excellent PhD supervisor who has remained my friend up to now. And then there are other people who've come along and they just took an interest in my career. There was no benefit for them. They just took an interest in my career and have helped me. So I had a question, I would go and talk to them. And to get to where I am, you need loads and loads of references. You need people to write references for you. And I know people who struggle to get somebody to write a reference for them. You need people to put you forward for certain things and to say good things about you in conversations with the people who are making decisions. And in that respect, I am very thankful. And I really am quite determined to ensure that anybody that I can assist in that way, I will.
Yeah, I think hearing the importance of allyship is really key, especially when you're in environments where there's not necessarily people that look like you, but they're still willing to advocate for you, and focusing on that mindset of kind of focusing on the positives rather than the negatives, and being in what you're in control of, you will work on. What is outside of your control, yeah, you almost conceded and left to them. Did this affect your opportunities when it came to funding and progressing? And I think you've alluded to the time it took you to get to some of those levels. What was your thoughts on that?
I heard a UKRI statistic which shocked me, and I wonder if it still stands now, that possibly all of your research applications have been rejected.
I think what came out was that, and actually this data is available in the public domain. So if you wanted, you could go to UKRI website and you can put in my name there, and you can see whether I have had any funding. It's all there. But what actually came out is that because I became a professor in 2007, and this came out maybe 2 years ago in 2022, which is 15 years. And over that period of time, I hadn't had a UKRI application funded, although I'd had many applications submitted. And I think it is not unusual that somebody gets no support that way. I'm sure I'm not alone in that. But what was unusual is that over that period of time, obviously I had done lots of things. And actually, if you wanted to match my profile and the success in funding, that person should be having lots of funding.
We spent 2 minutes talking about your accolades. I'm sure at that point in your life, we were just on one of the columns, so.
Yeah, so I think that's probably what a lot of people were surprised. Now, so I should like to say that technically I now have a UKRI.
Okay.
But
Alhamdulillah.
it's because and I need to say this because it was an EU. It was an EU.
Okay.
It was funded by the EU, but because we had not yet associated with Horizon, there was a backup of it that was through the Innovate UK, and so there is a grant there, which is a EU wide grant on some of the work that I do. You will not see it on the UKRI website, but I have to say that because that's the case. So the funding comes from them, but actually it was an application that was successful from the EU rather than from UKRI.
Do you have numbers on how many applications you submitted?
Now, I mean, I don't have it. I don't have the number. But actually, when you're in my sort of the sort of things that I was doing, you will tend to submit at least one application every year. And if you're talking about 15 years, so you can start imagining how many applications, and most will probably submit a little bit more than that. But anyway, you see, but I was lucky that I was able to obtain funding from other places, and so be able to do the research that I have done over the years. That has been reasonably well received. But obviously, I also recognize that they are the main funder for the people who do my sort of research, and so it's an unusual situation. But I have tried still to be able to do research by getting funding from other sources, and sometimes it's harder to get funding from those other sources. Yeah. Anyway.
I think that's a really nice segue into our next section, which we'd like to talk a little bit about your experience of being in the RSC. So we've mentioned that you're a trustee, on the board of trustees, and you're also on the a chair on the inclusion and diversity board. So I would say you have a quite unique perspective into, let's say, the governance of the RSC. So I think the top line, which is also kind of what got us into this work, is that Black chemists are being underrepresented at every level in academia and also industry. Can you maybe first just briefly talk to your experience of this underrepresentation? Yeah.
So obviously, I've been teaching at Nottingham for 20 odd years. So I mean, I teach undergraduates, chemistry undergraduates. We have had a relatively small number of Black students, no more than 2 or 3, maybe sometimes 1 in a year, a little bit more sometimes, and the number has sort of grown up. So it hasn't been completely barren in terms of undergraduate students. And of course, if you go to other universities, you get more Black students. Maybe Nottingham is not representative. But then when you go beyond that, when you go to the people who are teaching these students, then of course it becomes more challenging to find black lecturers. And for a long time, I hadn't realized that this was actually a challenge. So as I said, I was promoted to professor here at Nottingham in 2007. And I assumed at the time that there were several other Black professors in the UK. But actually, I hadn't met them. So I didn't know any other Black professor in chemistry. But I actually assumed that I didn't know them. But then sometimes I used to wonder, because actually the chemistry sort of community is relatively
small world.
Small. So you tend to know people, you go around, but I hadn't met anybody. And it's actually colleagues at the Royal Society of Chemistry who first suggested that you might be the only Black chemistry professor. And that was happening many years since I'd been a professor. This was happening maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So I'd already been a professor for 10 years. And I was saying that. So my reaction was, no, that's not possible. It cannot be possible. So I think they did go and check and look at the data to the extent they could, and they didn't find anybody else. So who is a professor in a chemistry department and a chemistry professor. So that then, for me, because I had been working with the Royal Society of Chemistry for a long time, but actually getting to the point where that now became reality, I felt that I mean it was very uncomfortable. It was a troubling statistic.
Sure, absolutely.
And so I felt, I mean, if there's anything that I can do to change this, to sort of, even if it's just shining a light on this issue, because it just didn't seem that sort of thing that we need to be comfortable with. And so, absolutely, I mean, from the research that the Royal Society of Chemistry have now done since then, and you may want to talk a little bit more about that, it's just become very clear that representation at the more senior levels in the chemical sciences is almost absent. So, I mean, people do talk about a leaky pipeline where it's leaking. I actually said it's not leaky, it's blocked. Nothing is going through. It's blocked at a certain point. And it needs to be unblocked. And I do hope and believe that initiatives are being put in place to mean that actually in a few years' time that will be different. And I mean, I remember doing an interview with a journalist who said, so what happens when you retire? You're an endangered species.
Wow.
When you retire, there won't be any of you. And I remember thinking, well, that's quite possible because I mean, unless others come along, the numbers will disappear. I am determined that anything that I can do, the Royal Society can do to change that, and I believe that that's already changing. So I want to tell myself that there are others out there who are.
That's right. That's right.
Who are joining the But anyway,
I know there's a lecturer at the University of Kent. His name is Dr. Aaron Burko, and I'm trying to understand like what is it that's blocking the pipeline, because I think he graduated from his PhD and has been lecturing at Kent since like 2010, maybe, I want to say. So 13 years later, and I think I last checked, and he was only just last year promoted to a senior lecturer, which is, I guess, maybe one step before professorship. So I looked on the government website about the sort of career paths that a lecturer might take, and they were talking about 5 to 7 years might seem a reasonable amount of time to reach professorship. So, I mean, 13 years, 7 years at the top end of that. Is this a systemic issue, or
it's not? I mean, the time can vary. It can vary. I mean, some people do it quicker. For some people, it takes a little bit longer, depending on so many factors. But what you'd expect is that. Without having any definite time frames, that actually somebody has a sense of progressing in their career, and that the only person really who can get that sense is the individual themselves, because actually it's not so much what happens to you, but it's what happens to those around you as well. So if you're performing at the same level, then you should just be progressing in the same way. But when one notices disparities that might be related to people's background and heritage, then that, of course, can be challenging. So I mean, I have had people describe those sort of situations to me. They feel that they are being held back, and whilst I cannot comment for anybody specific, but I think there is this sense that there is an absence of an equal sort of equality in terms of the opportunities, and a fair system where everybody can just simply succeed based on their enterprise and their hard work, and other issues come in, and I say that because that's what the data says. So, I mean, when you then find individuals who then tell you their lived experience, then that sort of rhymes with the data, which is actually saying that people are, you can see the numbers decrease as you go to a senior level. And that's obviously something that we would like people to think about and challenge themselves if they are in that process of making those decisions.
Yeah, I think as you've touched on the missing elements report, and you can find a link to full video. What was your experience of, number one, collecting the data, two, interpreting it, and then also the kind of key actions that have followed on from that? I think you've touched on being, at one point you were less than 0.5% of the represented, which rounded down to zero, which in itself is must have made you feel the type of way. And yeah.
So if you look at HESA data that actually summarizes numbers, so if you look at Black chemistry professors, it says zero. So it says 0%.
Right.
Yeah, so it says zero because you have to it has to be at least 5 for it to register, because if it says there's only 1 or 2, you can identify who those people are, and that's not data shouldn't be doing that. So the number has always been 0, which means that there is not at least 3, because it has to be 3 to be rounded up to 5, and so it is either 0 or 5.
Sure.
So that is the statistic anyway from HISA, which a lot of people and anybody can look up that data, which I think remains pretty much the same. Of course, in other areas there is better representation, but in the chemical sciences that's the situation. So you were talking about the missing elements report. So I mean my journey with the RSC, and one of the things that I did, knowing that we just need some sort of baseline, I did say, can we actually do some research and evidence this, so that we can talk about not our feelings or our thoughts, but actually look at the data. And they did an excellent job. And so the missing elements report is there for everybody to see. And what was found actually was quite stark. In the way that it is described in the missing elements report, that this pipeline is completely dry at the senior level, and that is that can be very troubling, because it just means that younger early career individuals, even going to secondary school or university, are not seeing these role models, because there is this great power in wanting to be somebody who looks like you. Now, people may argue about that, but actually I think that that is a reality, that when you see somebody like yourself, then you can imagine yourself. When you don't, then it's very difficult to even if it is subconscious in your mind. So of course there are various reasons why that is. But one of the reasons was that actually there was the report itself actually refers to racism, and that is what the report says, and the report is based on data.
That's interesting. When you say it refers to racism, would you say, is it fair to say that the actual culture of chemistry as we know it is a racist culture?
I think that's where the report ended. Yeah, I think that's the report. I mean, there was that's what came out, that there was this exclusion of certain sections of the community, and there was no reason really other than to describe it that way. And I absolutely applaud the Royal Society of Chemistry for taking the initiative to do that.
It's very powerful just to admit that, actually publicly publish it and keep the data available.
Yeah.
So
and
that's how you make change.
Yeah. And to be honest, the Royal Society of Chemistry looked at the chemical sciences, but they also had the opportunity to look at themselves as an organization. And there was lots of learning for the Royal Society of Chemistry there as well. But I can say clearly that it is something that they've taken on board with zeal, and so they have not ignored themselves as an organization, as a convener, as a message carrier, in terms of being an example of the change that can take place. Because I mean, people may ask the question, why is this an issue? Why is it an issue at all? Okay, it's one can say it's the right thing to do to make sure it's fair for everybody else, and you want to be fair. But actually, at the end of the day, I believe that the chemical sciences, which a chemical science community that excludes a section of the community, is going to be performing at a level that is lower than its optimum. So you're missing the perspectives and insights that would actually lift the performance of the chemical sciences. So for me, something that is important is that we are shortchanging ourselves by locking out some people.
Literally, I think actually in terms of the economic benefit to companies and to businesses.
I think so. Yeah, absolutely.
Really is shortchanging.
So a diverse team is a better performing team. And all the research has shown that actually when you have diversity, although many people believe that if you are the more homogeneous you are, the more you are likely to, but actually you miss so much that a more diverse team is a better performing team. Okay. So for me, if I wanted to create a team, one of the things that I would be looking at is that actually it is a diverse team, because then that starts to speak to how it's going to perform.
Yeah, and I fully agree. And I remember a wise quote that says, "Men lie, women lie, numbers don't." And the data is usually the truth. And I think what we've also found is that amongst those challenges, there are a number of actions that came out of that report, a number of schemes that have been aimed at addressing this. What was the thought process based on the data that was received, putting together some of these actions? And if you could share a bit about them as well.
So I think it became obvious that if this sort of pipeline is going to be unblocked, it would make sense to offer support to those who might already be experiencing some disadvantage as they are coming through the career path. So if you want to go out there and look for excellent undergraduate students who are Black, you will find lots of them. Absolutely. And they are doing marvelous. But then when they graduate, either they don't stay in chemistry, they go to do other jobs, or they find it difficult to carry on. So the program that came out of that decided to target those who are early in their sort of career, undergraduate students, PhD students, master's students, and also those who might be thinking about doing chemistry in university. So going to sort of teenagers who are in secondary school, who are thinking about. So there is the Windsor program, which actually targets a whole range of aspiring chemists. There is Destination STEM as well, which again it's targeting the younger sort of budding chemists. And then there's Broadening Horizons, which actually then targets more those who are in university, who are doing PhDs, and Broadening Horizons in particular has really been helpful because the convening power of the RSC has brought in individuals from other parts of the chemical sciences, including industry. Mm-hmm. Because we are not just talking about academic careers here, we are talking about industry as well. Because if you look at industry and look at the senior leaders in industry, again, you will find that there's a lack of Black chemists in those roles. So it's the chemical industry's widely interpreted, not just academia, although my own experience, of course, is within academia, and so there's been a program that actually has enabled young chemists to have access to placements in industry, to have people from industry come and talk to them, to have mentoring, to have mentors, that the number in any one cohort has tended to grow, and it's really been very positive. I think for me, the thing that has been most inspiring is when I have the opportunities to meet up with them, speak with them, it's the sort of questions that they are asking me. What the possibilities are in their minds and what they would like to do. And I can see that actually their horizons have been broadened. And they can see themselves doing certain things that probably in the past they hadn't seen before. And so I do believe that that's making a difference. Obviously,
that is real change.
It's going to make a change. We need more of that sort of thing. People may say, why are you targeting and doing this? Actually, the Broadening Horizons is expanded, and it's amongst the group is not just black. It has some white students there as well, who may be having certain disadvantages according to what they state in there when they are applying. Socioeconomic and all that, because that's also another issue. So I think we just need to do that to ensure a level playing field, because I think that's what we are saying here. That people do not start with a disadvantage that actually stays with them all the way through.
Yeah,
go on.
I remember you saying as part of the launch event, especially as part of the missing elements, imagine chemistry without sodium, or imagine chemistry without all these different elements. And that is the importance. When you bring the periodic table, it's not the same as soon as you take out any of those elements. And you've touched on the importance of diversity and the benefits. What would you say in terms of the kind of next steps and actions? What have been the most effective? I think you've touched on the mentorship program and the access. If there was one thing that you could pinpoint and say, this is going to make a difference in 10 years, this is going to make sure that I am not an endangered species that retires, and what would you say is the one thing?
I think, and this must actually surprise people, that this is the one thing that I think has come about. I think that people are talking about this, and people realizing that actually there is something that they can do, and people are challenging themselves. I think because you can take 100 or 200 young people and put them through a program. It will have immense impact on them, and that's really, really positive. So the things that we mentioned, Windsor, Destination STEM, and Broadening Horizons, absolutely. But actually, that now this is something that people are talking about. It's not just the Royal Society of Chemistry. I know that other learned societies are talking about. The Royal Society is actually looking at this as well. The Institute of Physics is looking at this. Royal Academy of Engineering is looking at this. So this is now something that people are actually saying, look, why is this? I mean, what can we do? And I'm not saying that this has come from just this work from the Royal Society of Chemistry, but I do think that the Royal Society of Chemistry was bold enough to speak out in the way that they did for the chemical sciences. And this now has, so we are in an environment where people are now much more likely to challenge themselves than we were 20 years ago.
Absolutely.
And I think that is something that for me, who has been, in this environment for a couple of decades, is a difference. And I sense it. Actually, the Royal Society of Chemistry itself will agree that the things they're doing now, they were not doing 10 or 15 years ago. And the way they are progressing is really very different. And the things that they're actually holding up as, this is what we want to do. So for me, I hope that will make a difference.
I agree with you almost entirely, but I also just want to play devil's advocate for a minute, because we had a conversation with someone a couple of days ago who also works in the diversity and inclusion space, doing similar work to what we do with Vanta STEM. And they mentioned that, if they were going to go back and do everything again, what they might do is not specify that their target market was a Black audience, and they would try and expand it to maybe more of a Black and minority ethnic audience. And the reason actually that they said that is because some companies that they speak to are uncomfortable with even just using the word Black, and maybe that has hindered some of their opportunities for sponsorship, working with companies. In fact, I think starkly, they submitted an application for some funding using the word Black throughout the application, was rejected. They changed it to BAME, and same application, and then the second one was accepted. I just wondered if you got any comments.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm very aware of that, and some people would run a mile from BAME, as you know. I think specifically for the work that Royal Society of Chemistry did, and I'll come to the wider context. They did find that there was an issue about there was a particular challenge for Black chemists, and if that's where the challenge was, that's where you start. Now, of course, the Royal Society of Chemistry is aware that this is not just for those with Black heritage, that it affects a much wider. And I think that is where the journey is going. And I do know, for example, the Royal Society has recently launched a new scheme, and it's called the Career Development Fellowship, to try and get more Black fellows who can then have an academic career. And they thought long and hard about it. The initial year is targeting those of Black heritage. And the reason why they did it, they make it very clear. They did research and they looked at the numbers, and the deficit was for those who identify as Black. That was the most challenging deficit. There are others. So, and they make it very clear that in the next iteration, it's going to include, and they say who it's going to be. They say they will include those of Bangladeshi origin or those of Pakistani. So it's going to grow. Yeah. But for the first iteration, they have looked at the data and they say this is where the deficit is, and they've gone with the data and they've justified it that way. So absolutely, I do agree that some may be uncomfortable with just being so focused on one section of the community, because actually, the challenges that we face, and I have always said this, generalizing and assuming that because somebody is from what is a minoritized community, that their experience is exactly the same to everybody else, that is not correct. So what you need to do is you have to really get to the bottom of it, you have to do some disaggregation and look at specific people's challenge. And if you're going to have solutions, or any mitigations, they need to address those specific, rather than having something that is general, because there isn't such a thing as a general person. I mean, I've always said there is no such a thing as an average person. We are all individuals, and we have to be defined in our individuality rather than the average person. And so, I mean, I do absolutely see the point that you've raised there, and that can be an issue for some. But I say, as long as you're doing something to address inequality, just do it. How you define it may be different from the way the neighbor defines it, but just do something that creates an equal playing field. Yeah,
I think that's a good thing to take from today.
I agree. Do something rather than nothing. And just maybe changing tact a bit, you were one of the founding members of the Pan-African Chemistry Network. Can you tell a bit about how that journey came about and some of the work that's been done? And I think initially when you look at the kind of sites that the RSC have, they have them in most continents apart from South America and Africa. So can you talk to us a bit about that engagement and what the next steps are?
Yeah, so again, this worked very well with the convening power of the Royal Society of Chemistry. That this goes back now 15 or so years. Again, about 2006, 2007, maybe a little bit earlier, where the idea of actually having this grouping that would bring together African chemists to be able to communicate to each other and have an avenue of collaborating came up, and the initial funding, of course, came from industry, and I'm sure Syngenta would not mind me saying that they initially are the ones who put in the funding that set up the Pan-African Chemistry Network, but others have since. It moved on from Syngenta to others, and so the idea was really to focus on the continent, because there was as you say, I mean, the Royal Society of Chemistry is in various places, but actually this was offering chemists in Africa the opportunity to be able to talk to each other, to collaborate with each other, to even know that they exist and that they are doing excellent work. And so I know that colleagues in Ethiopia were involved. I mean, the Chemical Society there, in Kenya, in West Africa, in Nigeria, Ghana, and all over Africa. So those chemical societies already existed. They were working within their own geographies, but actually being able to bring them together and to link them, to have sort of the Pan-African Chemistry Network that was sort of was a society that linked all of them together, was really very, very positive. And a lot of positive things have come out of that, because when we started holding conferences and people were traveling from different parts of the continent to come and speak to people who are learning about each other, about the work that we're doing. People were then being able to come together and apply for funding, not from just the Royal Society of Chemistry, but from other sources. And then there were other initiatives that needed just a small amount of funding to be able to take off, training people to be able to service pieces of equipment that would be used for 2 years because there is no servicing. They are thrown away. But actually, it just takes somebody to come over to the UK for 2 months, and the thing goes on for another 10 years. And then once they go, then they can train others in the so simple things like those that were then surfaced. So, I mean, many years later, I think the Pan-African chemistry is now, and that initiative is very much recognized as having had an impact in actually bringing and surfacing African chemists who are in Africa who are doing excellent research. And of course, others like myself who are not based in Africa, but are still very much African chemists, although not working in Africa. So it's had a positive impact, and now it's got an energy of its of its own. So it is something that I think has really helped in a different kind of diversity where we talk about the North and the South and and who's contributing what because there is excellent work that is going on in Africa, and actually you cannot solve the major global challenges that are facing us unless you include chemists and STEM practitioners from the South, whether it's South America, whether it's Africa, whether it is,
That's where all the raw materials are.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you can talk about it in many ways, but you cannot exclude a part of our geography and think that is still the whole world, because you have to. So I think that's really been helpful in sort of bringing them into the domain of the chemical sciences. And that would be my reflection from here. But I do know that those who have been involved from Africa have had the same experience. And for me specifically, it allowed me then to have the networks and to be able to do research projects in different parts of Africa, whether it was excellent research projects or capacity building and all that. I think that was, for me, also an eye-opener.
I'm glad that you touched on that point about diversity as well, because it's very easy to group Black people into this one homogenous group of people. I mean, we always refer to Africa as well, like it's this one little place. It's one of the biggest continents in the world. So
absolutely.
There's so much diversity just across the African continent. So it's really, really great to see that this network has come together and is doing such great work. I think it's going to be beneficial to both hemispheres, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one point I would like to ask is this disparity between fitting in and being yourself. And I think this is what a lot of people who are in corporate environments struggle with. So particularly, you've talked about up at leadership levels, the number of Black faces seems to deplete. Do you think it is more important to try and fit in, or do you think it's more important to try and turn up as unapologetically Robert Mokaya? Or do you need to play a balance of both?
Yeah, well, you can try to be all things to all people. I don't know whether that would help to do that. But I guess for me, I understand that the greatest benefit that any environment will have for me is that I actually bring my perspective and my insights, and not to then necessarily want to modify them necessarily to fit into the environment, because that actually then means that I'm not being myself. Now, I am not going to in any way seem to criticize anybody who thinks that the best way to get on is to actually fit in, because there has to be an element of that, because you have to be able to work with people anyway.
Collaboration.
Collaboration. But in that context, but I think being who you are, being your authentic self, is really, really important. And for me, I have found that I have called them red lines, and that's who I am. sometimes it is difficult at the beginning that people just don't understand why you are not just doing things like everybody else. But actually, when they come to understand and realize that you can that way make a significant contribution, they become respectful, and then of course they make space for you, and then soon it becomes normal. So you're not fitting in anymore, because actually what you've done is to expand the space so that there is actually space for you to be yourself. And that also benefits others who perhaps are coming from a different perspective. It sounds easier said than done because some environments are really very difficult to sort of shift in that way. But I hope that everybody can feel that they have got the space to be who they are, and they don't have to be different people in different spaces, because actually that's a hard job.
I think it also would rely on, if you are alone in those kind of spaces, then to turn up how you want to turn up, but also rely on the support of people around you, people you trust, your family, your friends, who can, I guess, reinforce your identity in a way where you don't feel like you have to shy away from it. Really good answer, though. I think trying to create your own name. One of our values within Vanta STEM is the power of self. It's the S in STEM. So we talk about this a lot, and we think it's one of the things that's shaped, our path there. And also being for other people to be able to see, chemists that look different, chemists that maybe tie their hair into cornrows, or who.
I do have a talk that I give that is titled "Am I a black chemist, or am I a chemist who happens to be black?" And actually, I look forward to the day when I will just be a chemist who happens to be black, rather than a black chemist. Because you don't hear other chemists described that way. They're just simply chemists. And I want to be just a chemist, but I am black, of course. That's my heritage, that's my identity. But that shouldn't be the bigger thing in my being a chemist. It should just be, yes, chemists can be whatever. They can be tall, short, they can be white, they can be Asian, they can be anything, in the widest sense of diversity.
We're getting there. I think we're getting there.
I agree. And so maybe a bit of a controversial question here in terms of accepting your OBE. So you were awarded an OBE in, I think it was 2022. And there seems to be kind of two schools of thought when it comes to accepting these awards. There's some that reject them as being part of they don't want to be a part of the British Empire, as it were, where there are others that do accept them. And considering that we're in Britain as it is, former colonies, all these different contexts. What was your personal thought at the time, if you don't mind sharing that with us?
Yeah, okay. So I absolutely respect the opinion of those who feel that, who choose not to accept these awards. And of course, I mean, in things like this, there will always be different opinions, and I am very respectful of those opinions, and I absolutely understand where they are coming from. But I'm also mindful of what it is that recognition actually is recognizing, and so long as I am confident that this recognition is recognizing something that not necessarily I have done, but something that I have found myself in an environment that I have made actually a difference. And one of the things that I thought about is, any contribution I have made based on a lot of support from a lot of people, and in a sense, this was recognition for all of that effort. It's about actually what you have done. I mean, I know that it's got the word empire in it, and some may say maybe that word should be a different word, and it hankers back to a different time. And I absolutely understand that, but it is also quite clear to me that it is recognizing something that somebody has done or has been enabled to do that actually has had an impact, a positive impact on other people, and that is the context in which I see it. So I find myself in this time where I am, and of course, when I look back. my country was a colony.
Yeah.
And was a colony. And actually, when I talk to my uncles and who most of them now are gone, they would tell me things, and some of the things they told me were not pleasant. And Kenya itself has a history. I mean, you will hear about the Mau Mau uprising and the things, and I know that. His Majesty the King visited Kenya not too long ago, and some people are talking about those things. So I'm very, very much aware of those things. Whilst I am not going to be one of those people who say that it doesn't matter what has happened, but I also know that we are in a different environment. That actually nowadays, when Kenyans talk about their history, they talk about it with confidence. They are not oppressed anymore in the way that they were oppressed. They are talking with confidence. They are talking as equals, and that is the environment in which we are. So whilst I'm very respectful of the other views, I also recognize that I also recognize what this is recognizing, and I'm actually just the holder on behalf of many other people, and the feedback that I have had from those many people who have been part of this journey has been very, very positive, and maybe that's enough to just
Not many get to enter the palace.
No,
I say.
exactly,
So that must have been an exciting experience in itself. So,
I think we got time for one last question before we conclude with the quickfire round. I wanted to just touch on faith and science. I don't know if you want to take this one, Clive.
Yeah, so I came across a lecture you did quite many years ago around your future being certain. And I think you also speak about your father being a minister of faith as well. And often when you hear things of the kind of theory of evolution versus God making the world in 7 days, how have you been able to grow in both regards in terms of your faith and also your progression in science as well?
Yeah, so a good question. So I think some people will consider that actually you cannot be a scientist and have a faith at the same time, that those two actually contradict each other. But actually, what I have found my own journey is that at the limits, you need faith to believe in science, and it's about faith. And for many people, faith makes a difference. Faith actually defines their existence and their choices and what they do. And whilst you can find all sorts of situations in the past which you can ascribe to people behaving in a certain way because of their faith. For me, I have found no contradiction. So I can do my science and it will tell me what it tells me, but it doesn't contradict with my with my faith. I think there are some big questions which science seeks to answer. But there are other interpretations of those, and of course, what I really value is the fact that people have this opportunity to think about these things and arrive at a position where they are comfortable that this works for me, whether it is a faith-based journey or it is a scientific journey, but actually that there is mutual respect in that space, that people can then still be enterprising in terms of what they're doing.
I like that.
Very
We're both
inspiring.
deeply connected in our faith as well, and it's something that's often asked of us. And I think it's like, people just don't understand how you can straddle the line between two sides. Even though for me, it just makes complete sense.
Yeah, it hasn't been an issue for me anyway. But thanks for asking.
Yeah,
yes,
no problems. All right, quick fire round. Let's try and keep them nice and sweet. Maybe a sentence long for your answers. Favorite food?
Well, it's actually a Kenyan food called ugali.
Not potatoes.
Ugali, yes. it's ugali.
I'm so glad you said ugali.
Can you tell us a bit about, for those that haven't had it before, can you tell us a bit about it?
So ugali is, it's maize meal, yeah, and then you make it into, it's sort of like a cake. Is that correct?
Yeah,
but a
something
bit
like that,
a bit
yeah.
harder.
Yeah.
So it's actually, I don't know what the closest equivalent in the UK would be.
It looks like mashed potato, but doesn't
but it's
seem
from
or
maize
feel
meal.
anything like mashed potato.
It's maize. You grow it, you dry it, and then you sort of turn it into a powder. So, and then of course you cook it.
You rip it off and you have it with the sauce. And
we have it. You have it with a sauce, and it's very filling. So I grew up eating that, and when I still eat that. Yeah.
The thought of it has made me hungry in itself. So we'll definitely have to come around for that invite, and hopefully there'll be some on the menu.
Yeah,
as well.
and you asked for my favorite. The other one is chapati. I think you know what chapati is.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
I eat one every morning.
So next we have favorite music genre, whether it's a song or a music or an artist. Do you have any preferences?
So this is something I'm actually quite. I'm very general when it comes to music, but the thing that really catches me are those old hymns.
Okay.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, old hymns. It doesn't matter where they've come from, and those I can get lost in those.
Good old John Wesley.
Because they take him back to my childhood and all that. So I mean, I don't have too much time to listen to music now, but when I do, that's what really catches me.
Oh, I love that. We won't make you sing any, but
It's funny because I'm Muslim, but I went to a Catholic school when I was very, very young, 8 or 9, and I still remember all of the hymns. It was my favorite part of Mass. Favorite quote or expression, if you have one?
I think what I like to say, and this is my own quote, which
better.
I have already said,
Even better.
is the the best way to make sure nothing happens is to do nothing.
I love that. I love that. We're gonna have to chop that up and turn it into a proper.
Get on a t-shirt.
Yeah, it's definitely worth sharing, and has inspired me to make sure that even on the down days, you do something. Yeah. So the next one we have is favorite icon, hero, celebrity, anyone from any field that you've looked up to as at any point in time, really.
Actually, this may sound quite boring, but my heroes throughout my life have been my parents.
Oh, I love that. Love that. It's not boring at all.
At all. And I think it also shows the importance of family and a lot of the lessons that are instilled in us very early on. Sometimes you don't realize it, but at one point, parents are really important.
Pastime, hobby that you like to get up to?
Oh yes, I am often found wandering around the place where I live, pretending to be jogging. So I do run, and I enjoy running.
Does that stem from your Kenyan roots as well? We know that they tend to be the best long distance runners. You've mentioned some hills.
Perhaps. I mean, there are people from my local area who are known to have won gold medals at the Olympics.
Okay. Wow.
Too late for me.
Okay.
But yes, that's something that I like to do. Yeah.
So next, I think we've got dream holiday or destination. If you could be anywhere in the world, where would you be?
Given that I've lived here many years, I think my dream holiday is always to go back to Kenya. Because it's, and in Kenya there are many places, So drop me anywhere in Kenya and...
You're good to go.
I think you said earlier it's still your favorite place in the world.
I did say the most beautiful place is, yeah.
Least favorite STEM subject?
Now, this may surprise many, but it's actually maths.
Oh, really?
I can relate.
Yeah, I've done a lot of maths.
Hard work as a researcher.
I've done a lot of maths in my life.
Yeah.
But some might say being a chemist, I was dodging maths.
You can just about do it. You can just about do it.
Yeah.
I can definitely relate to that.
Same.
Yeah. So it's the one subject, off record, that I when my children were growing up and I was helping them, I could help them with their chemistry, with their physics, with their biology, up to very late, even when they were in university.
Yeah.
But when they got to high school, I couldn't help them with the maths. So, anyway.
I can relate. The next one we've got is biggest pet peeve or anything that grinds your gears.
Rubs you up the wrong way, just gets on your nerves a bit.
When people treat others badly.
Yeah.
I think fairness for me is really important. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great one.
It's a good value to have.
Yeah.
Any fears or phobias?
I'm looking for one still. I'm still looking
That's
for
great.
one. I'm still looking for one.
That's great. That's great.
I'm not saying I'm fearless, but
you
I'm
haven't
saying I'm
found it
still
yet.
looking for what it is. Now I haven't found it yet.
Better than me, which is clowns.
Really?
I don't know why. They just freak me out.
So finally, we've got what animal best represents you, or what animal would you describe yourself as?
You know, I'd have to say I'd have to think about that, but I would say that it'd probably be a cheetah.
Oh, lovely.
Fastest
Yeah.
on the land.
Yeah, well, probably be a cheetah, because it is fast, but actually when it needs to be a big animal, it still can be a big animal. Yeah, because most fast animals are not necessarily
True.
Yeah, big. It's probably the fastest big animal.
True. I love that.
Anyway, yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I don't want to take up too much more of your valuable time. It's been a real pleasure, and I think it's been a wonderful conversation for us, and I'm sure that everyone listening has enjoyed this. Any final comments anyone wants to add before we wrap up?
No, I just wanted to thank you again for coming to Nottingham. I think what you're doing, shining a light in this, in the chemical sciences and in STEM in general, is really, really important. And so I wish there were more people like yourself. So I wish,
thank you.
Wherever this goes. And thank you for coming to speak to me. I've never considered myself as, sometimes you describe the thing that I've done, but it's all been done with a lot of support from other people.
It's still always important to pay people their flowers, because I think that, we like to be humble. I think it's natural, but recognizing your accolades, just taking a moment to stop and be like, oh, I've done a good job on this road. So thank you for being an inspiration, and thank you for everything that you're doing yourself in chemistry and the chemical sciences and at Nottingham University as well.
Yeah.
Pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.